Welcome to Reading with Ryan. On today's episode, our 9th in our ongoing Ramadan Reading Reflections series, we're going to look at a book that I first read in early summer 2018, which is The Sufi Path of Love, The Spiritual Teachings of Rūmī by Professor William C. Chittick of Stony Brook University. This was published in 1983 by SUNY Press, the press of the State University of New York. And this is a book that throughout the last 7 years I have been unable to put down. I find myself coming back to it again and again, whether for just reading a few pages or reading entire chapters. And it is a book that, regardless of where you are on your own intellectual or spiritual or philosophical journey, I can guarantee will speak to you in your own unique circumstances. This is what Maulana Rumi always does. And the poetry here is compiled from two different sources, his Matnavi, his magnum opus, and then of course his Divan, his collected corpus of much of his poetry. So just to begin, there's a quote at the very beginning from his Divan, which is number 17925. And this speaks truly to everyone, I think, regardless of if you're Muslim or non-Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Zoroastrian, Hindu, Confucian, atheist, agnostic. Anyone can relate to this. If you have lost heart in the path of love, flee to me without delay. I am a fortress invincible. This book is a text that I would recommend to anyone who is interested in authentic, accurate translations of Rumi. The works of Coleman Barks, which are the most widespread best-selling interpretations of Rumi in English, are beautiful prose, loose interpretations of much of the spirit of Rumi's ghazals, but they are not accurate, in most cases, literal, faithful renderings of the Persian. He has a doctorate in English. He is a wonderful poet in his own right. His own verse is very beautiful. But as he himself would point out, his works on Rumi are more creative interpretations, very much true to many of the inner dimensions of tasawwuf or irfan, Islamic mysticism, but they tend to be more of a new age approach. And that is to say that many of his renderings of certain verses of Rumi's ghazals have sort of de-Islamicized his actual original writings. There's a wonderful Instagram page, Persian Poetics, which I would urge all of you to check out. And the scholar there, a young Iranian-American man, does wonderful, beautiful work on faithful prose translations of Rumi's Persian into the readable but accurate English translation. And his name is Mohammed Shaghzadeh, and he just actually released his first book of a compilation of some of Rumi's most powerful and beautiful ghazals into English. So I would urge you all to check that out. This book is broken down by Dr. Chittick into 3 sections: theory, practice, and attainment to God. And that's a deliberate pattern based, of course, on many of Maulana Rumi's own writings that join these 3 areas coterminously. So as soon as, for instance, you begin reading the Matnavi, the very first verse, you're immediately inundated and brought into this mystical world. And by mystical, we mean the realm of the spirit, the realm of the heart, qalb in Arabic, or dil in Parsi and Urdu. And so you're brought into this immediate spiritual universe. So one thing that Professor Chittick does in this work, which is, I believe, invaluable, again, this text is over 40 years old, and yet I continue to go back to it, as do many aspiring scholars and already practicing endowed professors and academics in the field of Sufi studies, because the entirety of this book is an encyclopedic manual and guide for not just how to understand Rumi's ghazals, what he is truly getting at, but it is also itself a kind of spiritual manual for a path for the purification of the heart. And ultimately, there's the theoretical underpinning, the conceptual underpinning, then there's the practical application of the theory, and then there is ultimately the path of the realization, or the haqiqat, the inner realities and truths of attaining proximity to God, which is the be-all, end-all, or telos of the Sufi path, of the salik, of the wayfarer. I will read briefly from his introduction, which is important by virtue of the fact that the translator here is going to articulate for us why he set out to write this work and what was the point. So he begins with a brief history of Rumi's life and his early life as a jurist, himself the son of a jurist. Rumi's father was a famous local jurist and qadi, and also a Sufi in his own right, a mystical scholar and teacher and theosopher. And then, of course, Rumi in his middle age has this incredibly life-changing experience where he meets this mysterious figure, Shams-e-Tabriz, Shams, the son of Tabriz. Tabriz, of course, is this city in the Iranian province of Azerbaijan, as opposed to the Republic of Azerbaijan. So in northwestern Iran, near the Republic of Azerbaijan, and also near the border with Armenia. So this is where Shams comes from, hails from, and Rumi, of course, was born in Khorasan, in the eastern Iranian lands, in what is today Afghanistan. So he originally was born in Balkh, so he was called, of course, Jalaluddin Muhammad al-Balkhi al-Rumi, because Rum, or Rumelia, central Anatolia, named after the Byzantine or Roman occupants and rulers of so many centuries, was the center of the Seljuk empire at the time, or kingdom, and the Turkish city of Konya, where Rumi, of course, died, or ancient Iconion in Greek, Iconium in Latin, was the place where Rumi, of course, spent the last third of his life, teaching, initiating students, instructing them in the spiritual path, and so forth. So Chittick gives a very detailed, brief overview of Rumi's life as follows. Jalaluddin Rumi was born in Balkh, in present-day Afghanistan, in the year Anno Hijri 604, or AD 1207. His father, Baha'u'llah, was a well-known preacher, jurisprudent, in other words, a qadi, a judge, and a faqir, a scholar of the Islamic sciences, and a Sufi, who traced his spiritual lineage to Ahmad Ghazali, brother of the more famous Muhammad Ghazali, and master of such well-known Sufis as Ayn al-Qudat Hamadani. As both a jurisprudent and a Sufi, Baha'u'llah was an authority in the exoteric sciences related to the Sharia, or the divine law of Islam, and the esoteric sciences related to the tariqah, or the spiritual path. So, of course, these are the three dimensions of the Islamic sciences. The outer or broad dimension of sacred law is the Sharia, and of course Sharia in Arabic is a broad public street or lane, and then the tariqah is a smaller lane, or kind of a narrow byway, and tariqah here, of course, is the spiritual path, and then there's haqiqah, which is the inner reality of things as they are. In the former capacity, so as a judge, as a religious scholar of the sacred law, Baha'u'llah guided ordinary Muslims in their religious duties, and in the latter, as the head of a tariqah, he led a select group of disciples on the way of self-purification and spiritual perfection. Baha'u'llah is the author of the Ma'arif, the divine sciences, a relatively lengthy compendium of spiritual teachings with which Rumi was thoroughly familiar, the influences of its style and content upon his works being readily apparent. In the Ma'arif, Baha'u'llah demonstrates his firm faith in the Islamic revelation and undertakes an outspoken defense of its spiritual and esoteric teachings, as opposed to the blind legalism of so many of his contemporaries. In many instances, he wields the sword of intellectual and spiritual discernment against the policies and opinions of such men as Muhammad Khwarizm Shah, the ruler of the time, who sometimes attended his sermons, and Fakhruddin Razi, the famous theologian and author of several classics of Islamic thought, who also lived in Balkh. Around the year 616 of the Hijra, or 1219 CE, the Mongols were moving ever closer to Balkh. Baha'u'llah left the city with his family and many followers to make the pilgrimage to Mecca, knowing that he would probably never return to his home city. It is said that on the way, he stopped in Neshapur, or Neshabur in Arabic, where Attar was living as an old man. This is Farid ad-Din Attar, one of the greatest Sufi saints and poets and philosophers of the region of Khorasan, of the eastern Iranian lands. Attar was an old man, the acknowledged master of expressing Sufi teaching in verse. Attar presented him with a copy of his Asrar-Nama, the Book of Mysteries, Asrar-Nama, telling him, "Your son will soon be kindling fire in all the world's lovers of God." After making the major pilgrimage, Baha'u'llah set out for Asia Minor, where he was received warmly in Konya, in present-day Turkey, so Iconium, by the Seljuk king Ala al-Din Qaykubad and his erudite vizier Mu'in ad-Din Parwana, who was later to become one of Rumi's most influential devotees. Baha'u'llah soon occupied a high position among the city's scholars and was given the title Sultan al-Ulama, the ruler of the men of knowledge. In the tradition of his forebears, Rumi began studying the exoteric sciences, in other words, the sacred law and theological and kalam theology, so didactic theology, at an early age. These included Arabic grammar, prosody, the Quran, jurisprudence, or the science of the Sharia, principles of jurisprudence, hadith, the sayings of the Prophet, Quranic commentary, or tafsir, history, dogmatics, theology, logic, philosophy, mathematics, and astronomy. And of course, Rumi relies on all of these in his texts. He gives examples of all of these, his familiarity with all of these dimensions of the outer aspects of Islamic learning in his ghazals. By the time his father died in 628 or 1231, Rumi was an acknowledged master in these fields. His name is to be found in the old sources among the lists of the doctors of the law belonging to the Hanafi school. Given his erudition, it is not surprising that at the young age of 24, he was asked to assume his father's duties as a preacher and jurisprudent. So Rumi here becomes, at quite a young age, a faqir and more than anything else, a qadi, a religious judge. When Rumi took over his father's position, he must already have been well versed in the spiritual techniques and esoteric sciences of Sufism, since he had been raised by an outstanding Sufi master. He could hardly have avoided acquaintance with Sufism, even had he been so inclined. In other words, even if Rumi had not wished to be initiated into the inner mysteries of Sufism that were developing in institutional form over the last 200 years or so in the area, he still would have been exposed to it by virtue of who his father was and who most of his associates were. However this may be, most sources state that his formal training in Sufism begins when Burhan al-Din Tirmidhi, a high-ranking disciple of Rumi's own father, came to Konya in 629 AH or 1232 CE. Until Tirmidhi's death in 1240, Rumi practiced the discipline of the spiritual path under his guidance. So after Rumi's own father, of course, Tirmidhi was his first, or in this case his second teacher in the way. After Tirmidhi's death, Rumi occupied himself mainly with preaching to and guiding the people of Konya. He gained widespread fame as one of the most respected doctors of the law, while he continued his own spiritual practices as a Sufi adept. As S.H. Nasser has pointed out, by this time Rumi was already an accomplished Sufi master. In other words, he had traversed the stations of the Sufi path and realized the direct and immediate vision of God he discusses so constantly in his verse. But in spite of his spiritual attainments, Rumi's outward life remained the same as it had always been. He preserved the customary activities and trappings of a staid and honored doctor of the law. In other words, he lived a very publicly normative, sober life in which he was regular on the social scene. He received visitors at his home. He, of course, had married and had children. So he was behaving as an eminent man of polite public society, with all its attendant honors, customs, and dues. Sometimes he would discuss the spiritual mysteries in his sermons, but he never gave any outward indication that he was any different than than other jurisprudents and lawyers for having knowledge of them. Then in the year 642 or 1244, the enigmatic figure Shams al-Din of Tabriz came to Konya, and Rūmī was transformed. Here are a number of verses from Rūmī's Divan where we can see the shattering impact, the breaking out of Shams's role here on Rūmī, his impact. I was the country's sober ascetic. I used to teach from the pulpit, but destiny made me one of thy hand-clapping lovers. My hand always used to hold the Quran, but now it holds love's flagon. My mouth was filled with glorification, meaning making glorification of God, but now it recites only poetry and songs. Passion for that beloved took me away from erudition and reciting the Quran until I became as insane and obsessed as I am. I had followed the way of the prayer carpet and the mosque with all sincerity and effort. I wore the marks of asceticism to increase my good works. Love came into the mosque and said, O great teacher, rend the shackles of existence. Why are you tied to prayer carpets? Let not your heart tremble before the blows of my sword. Do you want to travel from knowledge to vision? Then lay down your head. If you are a profligate and a scoundrel, do justice to troublemaking. If you are beautiful and fair, why do you remain behind the veil? Shams Tabrizi's influence upon Rūmī was decisive, for outwardly he was transformed from a sober jurisprudent to an intoxicated celebrant of the mysteries of divine love. One could say that without Shams, there would have been no Rūmī. Nevertheless, one must not overestimate the role that Shams played, since Rūmī was already an accomplished adept when Shams arrived on the scene. It is true that Shams may have guided him to the realization of certain stations of perfection to which he had not already gained access. But on the whole, one must incline toward Nasr's interpretation, where Nasr writes here, it seems that Shams ad-Din was a divinely sent spiritual influence, which in a sense exteriorized Rūmī's inner contemplative states in the form of poetry, and set the ocean of his being into a motion which resulted in vast waves that transformed the history of Persian literature. After a period of 1 or 2 years during which Shams was Rūmī's constant companion, Shams left Konya suddenly, to Rūmī's great dismay. Rūmī was able to persuade him to return, but shortly thereafter, around the year 645 or 1247, he vanished, never to be seen again. According to some reports, he was murdered by jealous devotees. In other words, some of Rūmī's students who were so upset and incensed that their great master and teacher had lost his public reputation by becoming so utterly infatuated with this mystical figure who came out of nowhere, as it were. There are some early reports that some of Rūmī's disgruntled students of the law or some of his erstwhile devotees were so incensed and so upset at this mystical figure monopolizing their master's time that they did away with him, with Shams. However this may be, he remained alive in Rūmī's heart and became the subject of numerous ghazals or love poems in the divan which bears his name. So the Divan-e-Shams Tabrizi was, of course, dedicated by Rūmī to his great friend and beloved teacher and companion. Particularly poignant are the poems which sing of separation from Shams. But in these verses, as in all of Rūmī's poetry, it quickly becomes clear that the outward form is but a veil over the inward meaning. In other words, Shams as a historic figure, as a person, as Rūmī's friend, becomes a trope, a device by which Rūmī is ultimately singing of the pain of separation from the absolute beloved, God himself, the One. Separation from Shams ad-Din, the sun of religion. So a pun on, of course, Shams means literally here the sun, and ad-Din of religion or the way. So what was his given name? Was it Shams? Of course, this has been debated. but of course this was most likely a title that Rumi gave him out of affection and love. Separation from Shams was but the appearance. Separation from the divine beloved, the Son of the Sun, was the reality. Unlike most Sufi poets, or Persian poets in general, Rumi practically never ends a ghazal with his own name. This, of course, is a great distinction to Hafez, right? But either mentions no one, or refers to Shams, or certain other figures. In most of these verses, Shams represents the image of the divine beloved, the divine Son, as reflected in the perfect saint. But Rumi often seems to have substituted Shams' name for his own as an act of humility and an acknowledgement of Shams' decisive role in his own transformation. In such lines, although he is singing of Shams' perfection, in fact he is uttering the mysteries of his own union with God and the exalted spiritual station this implies. Here, quoting from Divan 16533, "Indeed, Shams-i Tabrisi is but a pretext. It is I who display the beauty of God's gentleness." In this connection, the following anecdote from one of the oldest and most authoritative of Rumi's biographies is worth quoting. "One day we were in the garden of Hussam al-Din Shalabi with Maulana," meaning our master, Rumi. "He had put both his blessed feet in a brook and was speaking about the divine sciences, the things of God. In the midst of his words, he began praising the attributes of the king of the faqirs, the king of the mystics, Maulana Shams al-Din Tabrisi, Badr al-Din Walad. The teacher, one of the greatest and most perfect of the disciples, sighed and said, 'What a shame, what a loss.' Maulana said to him, 'Why is it a loss? What shame is it? What is the loss all about? What caused it? What business has loss among us?' Badr al-Din became embarrassed and looked at the ground. He said, 'I was lamenting the fact that I never met Shams ad-Din Tabrizi and never benefited from his luminous presence. All my sorrow and regret arose from that.' Maulana remained silent for a long moment. Then he said, 'Even though you have not attained to the presence of Maulana Shams ad-Din, may God magnify his mention, by the Holy Spirit of my father, you have attained to someone from each of whose hairs dangled 100,000 Shams-e-Tabrizis, each bewildered at the comprehension of the mystery of his mystery.' After the disappearance of Shams, Rumi did not continue with his preaching for the general public, but turned all his attention to the training of Sufi initiates. From this time to the end of his life, in 672 Anno Hijirai, or 1273 of the Common Era, he continued his profuse outpouring of inspired poetry. Rumi's major works are the Divan-i Shamsi Tabrisi of about 40,000 verses and the Mathnavi of about 25,000 verses. In addition, 3 collections of his talks and letters have been preserved. The Divan, or collection of poems, comprises some 3,230 ghazals, totaling 35,000 verses, 44 tarji'at, a type of poem composed of 2 or more ghazals, a total of 1,700 verses, and 2,000 rabaiyat, or quatrains. The Divan contains all of Rumi's poetry, other than the Mathnavi. It spans a period of almost 30 years, from some time after the arrival of Shams in Konya to Rumi's death. This is an important point, for it is often forgotten that a certain portion of the Divan was composed concurrently with the Mathnavi during the last 12 or 14 years of Rumi's life. Although a third of the poems in the Divan are dedicated explicitly to Shams, most of them make no mention of any person, often ending with such phrases as "be silent," and a few praise such figures as Salah ad-Din Zarkub and Hussam ad-Din Chalabi. Like Rumi himself, the former was originally a disciple of Burhan ad-Din Tirmidhi, but later joined the circle of Rumi's devotees. Chalabi was Rumi's disciple and became the immediate cause of the composition of the Mathnavi. In the Divan, both of these figures play a role similar to that of Shams. They are mirrors in which Rumi contemplates the divine beloved. The Mathnavi, or couplets, comprise 6 books of poetry in a didactic style, ranging in length from 3,810 to 4,915 verses, whereas the Divan contains Rumi's individual ghazals and other miscellaneous poems arranged according to the rhyme scheme. The Mathnavi represents a single work which was composed in its present order. Biographers state that Rumi began the Mathnavi at the request of his favorite disciple, Hussam ad-Din Chalabi, who had noticed that many of Rumi's devotees spent a good deal of time reading the didactic poetry of Sana'i and Attar, the 2 great masters of this genre, before Rumi. Such works present Sufi teachings in a form readily accessible and easily memorized. They are much more suited to the warmth and fellowship of Sufi circles than the classical textbooks on the same subjects, which are often written in dry and stilted language. Such poetry could be read and enjoyed by anyone with a command of the language and a certain amount of spiritual taste, dhawq, or initiation, while the textbooks could only be studied by those who had formal training in the religious sciences. One day, Chalabi suggested to Rumi that he write a work in the didactic style of Sana'i and Attar to complement his other poetry. Rumi immediately took a slip of paper out from his turban, upon which were written the first 18 lines from the Mathnavi. From then on, Rumi and Chalabi met regularly. Rumi would compose the poetry, and Chalabi would write it down and then read it back to him. Their work began sometime around 658 or 1260 of the Common Era, and continued with certain delays until Rumi's death, so over a period of 13 years. Since the 6th book of the work breaks off in the middle of a story, it seems that Rumi died without completing it. Like other long didactic Sufi poems before it, the Mathnavi is a rambling collection of anecdotes and tales derived from a great variety of sources, from the Quran to the folk humor of the day. Each story is told to illustrate some point, and its moral is discussed in great detail. The subject matter of the anecdotes, and more particularly the digressions, runs the whole gamut of Islamic wisdom, with particular emphasis upon the inward or Sufi interpretation. Most of the individual poems of the Divan may be said to represent particular spiritual states or experiences. What is called a hal, a spiritual state, a temporary state in English, such as union with God or separation after union, described in appropriate images and symbols. Although the Divan contains many short didactic passages, on the whole it appears as a collection of individual and separate crystallizations and concretizations of spiritual states undergone on the path to God. The overall feeling of the Divan is one of spiritual intoxication and ecstatic love. In contrast to the Divan, the Mathnavi is relatively sober. It represents a reasoned and measured attempt to explain the various dimensions of spiritual life and practice to disciples intent upon following the way. More generally, it is aimed at anyone who has time to sit down and ponder the meaning of life and existence. In a sense, one could say that the Divan comprises so many flashes and gleams from the inward dimensions of Rumi's spiritual life. Each poem is a symbolical image of a mystical state he has experienced on the path to God, or after having attained to the goal. But the Mathnavi is a commentary upon these mystical states and stations. So here there's a distinction between a hal, a temporary state, and a maqam, a station, which is an enduring, progressing, more permanent set of states, or spiritual level or realm. But the Mathnavi is a commentary upon these mystical states and stations. It places them within the overall context of Islamic and spiritual teachings and practice, and it corrects the mistaken impression that one might receive by studying different poems in the Divan in isolation and separating them from the wider context of Sufism and Islam. Very similar in style and content to the Mathnavi is the prose work, Fihi ma fihi, it is what is in it, or in it is what is in it, also written during the last few years of Rumi's life. This work, in fact, represents transcriptions of talks given by Rumi to various disciples. Like the Mathnavi, it is very much a didactic work, so a teaching work, explaining in detail and through a great variety of comparisons and analogies different dimensions of Sufi teachings. And then he goes into two other surviving works of Rumi, the Majalis-i-Sabah, the 7 Sessions, a short work that was essentially a number of sermons delivered primarily to a public audience rather than inner audiences of Sufis. And then, of course, Rumi's Maqatib, or his letters, which are 145 documents, usually 1 or 2 pages in length, which are addressed to various princes and noblemen of Konya and the surrounding regions. These tend to be recommendations or requests for various favors or help written on behalf of some of his disciples or friends. Before moving to the text itself, I will just add that, reading here on page 7, regarding the teachings, Rumi's voluminous works present a kaleidoscopic image of God, man, the world, and the interrelationship of these 3 realities. This is again Chittick here. But in spite of the often bewildering complexity of the picture Rumi paints, all his expositions and explanations are so infused with a common perfume and so harmonious that one can readily agree with those who say that they are all reducible to a single sentence or phrase. Although his teachings can probably never be totally encompassed by any systematic exposition, certainly all of them express a single reality, the overriding reality of Rumi's existence and of Islam itself. There is no God but God. La ilaha illallah. Quoting from the Divan here, how many words the world contains, but all have one meaning. When you smash the jugs, the water is one. Divan 32108. Rumi never set out to write an organized textbook on Sufism, or to give an exhaustive explanation of some or all of its teachings. Some of his contemporaries even objected to his unsystematic and anecdotal style, asking why there was no mention of metaphysical discussions and sublime mysteries. Here is a quote from Book 3 of the Mathnavi, Ghazal 4234. Many great Sufis of his day wrote erudite and systematic treatises on Sufi lore, but unlike them, Rumi did not describe and define each station and stage by which the mystic ascends to God. Quoting from, again, the 3rd book of the Mathnavi, Ghazal 4236. Rumi answers his detractors in a way that expresses clearly his own role as he perceived it. I'm quoting again from Book 3 of the Mathnavi from the same section here, 4237-39. When the Quran was revealed, the unbelievers criticized it in the same way. They said, it is only legends and contemptible tales. There is no profound investigation or lofty inquiry. Little children understand it. It is nothing but a few commands about what is approved and disapproved. In other words, Rumi is saying, you may criticize my words if you like, but you should know that they are like God's own words. They are a message of salvation for mankind. In many passages, Rumi states clearly that his aim is not primarily to explain, but to guide. His purpose in composing poetry and in speaking to his listeners is not to give them a scientific or scholarly exposition of this or that point of the Islamic teachings. Of course, he had already been doing that for many, many years as a judge, as a scholar, and a teacher. Nor is it to explain to them what Sufism, the inner dimension of Islam, is all about. He only wants to make them realize that as human beings, they are bound by their very nature to turn toward God and to devote themselves totally to Him. In fact, we can say about Rumi what we can say about numerous other figures in the history of Islamic thought. He takes the principle of the profession of God's unity, Tawheed, as given, and explains all that this principle implies for us as human beings in terms of our ideas, our activities, and our existence. But this simple statement cannot begin to tell us why Rumi has attracted so much attention from his own lifetime down to the present day. That must be sought not so much in what he is saying, but in how he says it. As soon as one separates Rumi's message from his own mode of expressing it, it becomes somehow dry and uninspiring. This is a major drawback of books about Rumi. By dissecting his poetry and thought, they lose sight of his heart and soul. To appreciate Rumi in all his dimensions, one must read Rumi himself, not the scholarly commentators. I will now move to Rumi himself directly. In the chapter titled Spirit, Heart, and Intellect, on page 35, we read as follows. This is a mix of verses from the Divan and the Mathnavi. So this entire book is Professor Chittick interspacing his own commentary on Rumi's words with the original text translated into English from the Divan and from the Mathnavi by Rumi himself. Within our breast, an intellect and an ego are in strife and tribulation, drunken with separation from their source. If the braying of your ass ego were to diminish, the call of your intellect would be your Messiah. By its nature, the intellect sees the outcome of affairs. The ego looks not to outcomes. The intellect vanquished by the ego becomes the ego. Jupiter, checkmated by Saturn, is inauspicious. The intellect is luminous and seeks the good. How then can the dark ego vanquish it? The ego is in its own bodily home, and your intellect is a stranger. At its doorstep, a dog is an awesome lion. And these are from various parts of the Divan and the Mathnavi. Chittick then comments here on the subsection entitled The Universal Intellect and the Partial Intellect. Only the intellects of the prophets and saints have truly vanquished the ego. Once the clouds have been dispersed, the sun shines down unhindered. In its full radiance, the intellect is referred to as the universal intellect, the akali kuli, or the intellect of the intellect. At this stage, the intellect can discern the meaning of every form and see things as they are. In the majority of human beings, no matter what sort of great minds they may have or how intellectual they may be, the intellect is veiled by the dross of the ego. Such veiled intellects are referred to as partial intellects, akal I juzvi. Naturally, there are many different levels of partial intellect, and although the universal intellect, capital U, capital I, is essentially one reality, it does not reveal itself to every saint and prophet to the same degree. The partial intellect needs nourishment from outside. Through it, one can acquire, by learning and study, the science of bodies. But the universal intellect is sufficient unto itself. It is the source of the science of religions, ulumuddin, and has no need for any sort of outside aid. And he's quoting here from parts of the Mathnavi. The intellect is of two kinds. The first is acquired. You learn it like a boy at school. From books, teachers, reflection, and rote, from concepts, and from excellent and new sciences. Your intellect becomes greater than that of others, but you are heavily burdened because of your acquisition. The other intellect is a gift of God. Its fountainhead lies in the midst of the spirit. When the water of knowledge bubbles up from the breast, it will never become stagnant, old, or discolored. If the way to its outside source should become blocked, there is no reason to worry, since the water keeps on bubbling up from within the house. The acquired intellect is like a stream led into a house from outside. If its way should be blocked, it is helpless. Seek the fountain from within yourself. He was quoting from the fourth book of the Mathnavi, verses 1960 to 63, and then 65 to 68. He continues, Rumi, be well aware of the discrepancies among intellects, which extend in degrees from earth to heaven. There is an intellect like the disk of the sun, and another less than Venus or a shooting star. There is an intellect happily flickering like a lamp, and another like a spark of fire. Partial intellect has disgraced the intellect with a capital I. Desire for the world has deprived man of the object of his desire. Mathnavi, Book 5, verses 459 to 61 and 463. He continues on, Muhammad was not said to be unlettered, Ummi, because he was incapable of writing or ignorant of the sciences. He is called unlettered because his writing, science, and wisdom were innate, not acquired. Should a person who can inscribe characters on the moon be unable to write? What was there in the world that he did not know? For indeed, everyone learns from him. What sort of thing could the partial intellect possess that is not possessed by the universal intellect? The partial intellect is unable to produce anything from itself that it has not first seen. These compositions, engineering feats, and structures that people erect are not new compositions. Having seen something like them, human beings merely make additions. Those who truly produce something new from themselves are the universal intellect. The partial intellect can be taught. It is in need of teaching. But the universal intellect is the teacher. It has no needs. Here he's quoting at length from Fihi Ma Fihi, verses 142 to 151. The philosopher is in bondage to intellectual concepts. The pure saint is mounted upon the intellect of intellect. The intellect of intellect is the kernel, your intellect, the husk. The stomach of animals are always seeking husks. The seeker of the kernel has 100 loathings for the husk. In the eyes of the godly saints, the kernel alone is truly lawful. Since the skin of the intellect gives 100 proofs, how should the universal intellect ever take a step without certainty? That's from the third book of the Mathnavi, verses 2527 to 30. Chittick continues regarding the heart. The ultimate center of man's consciousness, his inmost reality, his meaning as known by God, is called the heart, dil in Persian, qalb in Arabic. As for the lump of flesh within the breast, that is the shadow or outermost skin of the heart. Between this heart and that heart are infinite levels of consciousness and self-realization. As man's inmost reality, the heart is always with God, but only the prophets and saints, who are called the possessors of the heart, have achieved God consciousness, true taqwa, whereby they are truly and actually aware of God at the center of their being. Most men are veiled by innumerable levels of dross and darkness, so that in practice the center of their consciousness, or heart, is their animal spirit, or ego. And here Chittick quotes at length from Rumi's discourses in the Divan and the Mathnavi. Why is the heart a stranger in the two worlds? Because of the attributes of placelessness that shy away from place. When you look carefully, you see that all good qualities dwell in the heart. All these disgraceful qualities derive from water and clay. You are luminous water. Do not throw clay into the water. Conceal not the heart. Call not the heart's veil the heart. Most people are man-eaters, except no security. Most people are man-eaters, expect no security when they say, peace be upon you, salam alaikum. Their hearts are all houses of Satan, accept not the drivel of devilish men. In relation to the possessor of the heart, these partial hearts are like bodies, for he is the mind. the house of the heart that remains without illumination from the rays of the magnificent sun, is narrow and dark like a miser's soul, empty of the loving king's sweet taste. The sun's light does not shine in that heart. Space does not expand, doors do not open. The grave would be more pleasant for you. So come, arise from the tomb of your heart. Return to yourself, O heart. For from the heart a hidden road can be found to the beloved. If the world of the 6 directions has no door, then come to the heart. You can make a door. Come into the heart, the place of contemplating God. Though it is not so now, it can be made so. Within you is a moon, such a moon that the sun keeps calling from heaven, "Oh, I am thy slave, thy slave." Seek the moon from your own breast, like Moses. Gaze into your own window and say, "Hello, hello." Close down speech's door and open up the heart's window. The moon will only kiss you through the window. In the lane of love, a shout went up. A window has opened up in the house, the heart. What is this talk of windows? For a new sun has arisen. Not even a needle's breadth of shadow remains. Once the mirror of your heart becomes pure and clear, you will see pictures from beyond the domain of water and clay. Not only pictures, but also the painter. Not only the carpet of good fortune, but also the carpet spreader, with a capital C. The saints have polished their breasts until cleansed of greed, cupidity, avarice, and hatred. Without doubt, the pure mirror is the heart acting as a receptacle for infinite pictures. The Moses-like saint possesses within his breast, in his heart's mirror, the infinite, formless form of the unseen. What does it matter if that form is not contained by the heavens, the divine throne, the footstool, or the fish supporting the earth? These things are all delimited and defined, but the heart's mirror has no limits. Know that. Here the intellect must remain silent, or else lead us astray, for the heart is with him, with God. Indeed, the heart is he. How should the orients of the lights of Almighty God be contained in the heart? Yet, when you seek his light, you find it there. But this does not mean that his light is truly contained within it. Rather, you find it in the heart, just as you find your own picture in a mirror, though your picture is not truly contained by it. But when you look into the mirror, you see yourself. These last 2 passages, Chittick writes, allude to a famous saying of the prophet concerning the heart. God says, "My heavens and my earth encompass me not, but the heart of my gentle, believing, and meek servant does encompass me." Rumi often refers to this hadith directly or indirectly. Here quoting again at length from the Mathnavi and the Divan. Through God's perfect power, the bodies of spiritual men have gained the strength to bear the ineffable light. Hence the seal of the prophets related a saying from the eternal and everlasting King. "I am not contained in the heavens and the void, in the supernal intellects and souls, yet I stay like a guest in the believer's heart, without qualification, definition, or description." Outside of the 7 heavens, greater than the 2 worlds, and this is wonderful. That ineffable one is hidden within the heart. The 7 heavens are too narrow for him. how does he enter my shirt? If the two worlds were to enter my heart, they would be contemptible. What a wonderful expansion thou hast given my wounded heart through thy love. The heart of the saint or the wali contains God, while the heart of the ordinary man is mired in water and clay, Chittick writes. What determines the worth of a man is the state of his heart. Here we're using man in the sense that it refers to all humanity, so men and women. Of course, this applies as much to women. Man's task in this world is to cleanse his heart, to polish it, and ultimately to make it of a perfect mirror reflecting God. This he can accomplish only with the guidance of the possessor of the heart. Quoting again at length from the Mathnavi, and here this is an entire passage from the third book of the Mathnavi, verses 2243 to 50, and then 61 to 70. O heart, God will look upon you when, like a part, you return to your whole. God keeps on saying, we look upon the heart, not upon the form, for that, the form, is water and clay. You keep on saying, I also have a heart. The heart is above God's throne, not below it. Certainly, dark clay also contains water, but not water with which to make an ablution. Though it is water, it has been vanquished by clay. So do not say concerning your heart, this too is a heart. The heart that is beyond the heavens is the heart of the saints, or the prophet. Purified, cleansed of clay, it has entered into increase and become all-sufficient. It has abandoned clay and come to the sea. Freed from the clay's prison, now it belongs to the sea. You are obstinate and say, I am a possessor of the heart. I have no need for anyone else. I am in union with God. As if water in the midst of clay were obstinate, I am water. Why should I seek help? Imagining this polluted thing to be a heart, you turn your heart away from the possessor of the heart. Do you really allow that this object fascinated by milk and honey can be a heart? The taste of milk and honey reflects the heart. The sweetness of every sweet thing derives from the heart. So the heart is the substance and the world the accident. Here he's, of course, reflecting Aristotelian and Thomistic, so he's entirely conversant and familiar with Christian and Aristotelian contemporary logic. So the heart is the substance and the world the accident. How should the heart's shadow be the heart's goal? Does a heart fall in love with property and position and submit itself to this black water and clay, or to fantasies, worshipping them in darkness for the sake of empty talk? The heart is nothing but that ocean of light. In the heart, the heart is nothing but that ocean of light. Is the heart to be the locus for God's vision and then blind? Among hundreds of thousands of the elect and the vulgar, no heart is to be found. The heart is in one person. Which one is he? Which one? Moving ahead to Chittick's section, The Discipline of the Way, where Rūmī gives, through the Mathnavi and Divan, practical advice on how to look inward in one's spiritual wayfaring to make sure that one is in fact making appropriate progress in disciplining the levels of the soul in spiritual refinement. Rūmī writes as follows: You say, night and day I perform the ritual prayer, the salah or the namaz. How is it, O brother, that your words themselves are not a ritual prayer? Although the ritual prayer is an excellent act, its spirit and meaning are more excellent than its form, just as man's spirit is more excellent and more subsistent than his form. For man's form does not remain, man's body dies, but his spirit does. The soul and the spirit remain. In the same way, the form of the ritual prayer does not remain, but its meaning and spirit do, just as God has said. Those who are constantly at their prayers, quoting here from the Quran, Surah 70, verse 23. Thus, the jurisprudent explains the form of the ritual prayer. You begin it with, God is greatest, Allahu Akbar, and you end it with, peace be upon you, Salam Alaikum. But the Sufi explains the spirit of the prayer. Ritual prayer is union with God, such that none knows him who performs it but God himself. The precondition for the form of the prayer is purification with water, but the precondition for prayer's spirit is that you turn your eyes and heart into blood for 40 years through the spiritual combat of the greater holy war, Jihad al-Akbar, meaning the spiritual struggle, and that you pass beyond 70 veils of darkness and come alive through the life and existence of God. The prophets and saints do not avoid spiritual combat. The first spiritual combat they undertake in their quest is the killing of the ego. So the killing or the slaying and the overcoming of the lower passions of the nafs al-amara, the lower or baser aspects of the human soul, and the abandonment of personal wishes and sensual desires. This is the greater holy war, Jihad al-Akbar, so the inner spiritual struggle. The suffering of that world is beyond the limits of description. Compared to that, all suffering in this world is easy. Happy is he who wages the greater holy war, who chastises his body and gives it his due. Wishing to be delivered from the suffering of the world, he assumes the painful burden of worship in this world. This one is the greater holy war, the other the lesser. Both are the work of heroes like Rustam and Ali. So Rustam, of course, is the classical early mythical Persian figure, who of course is one of the great Sasanian period kings of mythical tradition in Iran, going back ultimately to Achaemenid roots, mentioned, of course, most famously in the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings. And Ali, of course, Imam Ali is the Prophet's cousin, son-in-law, and the man who for Shias becomes the first Imam, and for Sunnis he is the fourth Caliph. And he is the chief exemplar of spiritual chivalry, or Javan Mardi, or Fatwa in Arabic, and also the master of the masters of the Islamic sciences, especially the mystical sciences. So there's a famous hadith where the Prophet said, I am the city of knowledge, and Ali is the gate to the city of knowledge, which of course is greatly beloved by Sufi Sunnis and Shias alike. Continuing, they are not the work of him whose intellect and sober-mindedness jump from his body at the twitch of a mouse's tail. Your ego is causing your sins to increase. It used to be a worm. Now it has become a dragon. By night, a corpse. It eats unlawful food. By day, its belly full, it thieves and talks nonsense. Go, seek justice from a prince, a standard-bearer, a man of vision. The land is never empty of God's caliph. How could there be creatures without a lord? The world is ill in its confusion, without justice, punishment, or a banner of authority. The final medicine for the world's illness and malady is the sword. The time for the greater holy war, meaning the inner spiritual struggle against the self, has come. Arise, O Sufi, enter the battle. Cut the throat of sensuality with hunger. Fret not over stew, over soup. The dervish gives away his body and spirit. This is the principle of every generous act. Place them in the fire, for fire is an alchemy that transforms the unripe. Bounty for the body makes you unripe, but the body's affliction matures you. Until you undergo the affliction of religion, you will not win the good fortune of faith. Only God-fearingness, taqwa, religion and piety are of any use. Through them you gain prosperity in the two worlds. Vileness, evil, and bad moral qualities veil the human substance. Removing these veils is impossible without a great deal of spiritual combat. Acts of spiritual combat are of many kinds, the greatest of which is mixing with companions who have turned their faces toward God and their backs toward this world. No act of spiritual combat is more difficult than to sit with sound companions, for the very sight of them wastes away the ego and annihilates it. That is why it is said, when a snake sees no human being for 40 years, it becomes a dragon. In other words, when man sees no one who can cause his evil qualities to waste away. Man must cleanse all ulterior motives from his faculty of discernment and seek companions in religion. Religion, in this sense, is to recognize these true companions. Go, O heart, go with the caravan. Go not alone over the stages of the way, for pregnant, time gives birth to temptations. In short, be a companion of the congregation. Like a sculptor, carve a companion, even out of stone. For the caravan's multitude and throng will break the backs and spears of the highwaymen. Whoever wants to sit with God, let him sit in the presence of the saints. If you cut yourself off from their presence, you will be lost, apart without your whole. If the devil separates you from the noble saints, he will find you without friends and devour your head. To travel one instant without the congregation, even for a single span, results from Satan's deception. Know this well. Whether we speak of joy or heartache, let us sit as a congregation and speak together. So again, in Islam, there is this requirement that you still must be in the world but not of it. So the Prophet, the chief exemplar for moral piety, conduct, and living, was himself, despite his great asceticism. He would stand for hours in prayer, he would meditate and withdraw privately to pray for great swaths of the night. He would fast for days on end at times. Nonetheless, he still was in society. He was always approachable to people. He was always making himself helpful to people. He was constantly arbitrating disputes and so forth. So in Islam, the holiest model is to be holy in the world, to be an everyday saint. Continuing on, there's a beautiful section. There's so many beautiful sections in this book, but moving ahead to the section, the chapter on love, which begins on page 194, Chittick writes as follows. It can easily be shown that love, the Persian word here is ishq, for burning, passionate, consuming love. Love is the central theme of all Rūmī's works. If we were to begin studying him through the Divan, we would soon see that most of its poems deal explicitly with this subject. And as soon as one understands what Rūmī means by love, one can see that even the Mathnavi and Fihi ma Fihi, where the word love is not mentioned nearly as often, deal largely with love's branches and ramifications. In Rūmī's view, love totally dominates and determines the Sufi's inward and psychological states. But because love pertains to the experiential dimensions of Sufism, not the theoretical, it must be experienced to be understood. It cannot be explained in words any more than the true nature of one's attachment to a beloved of this world can be set down on paper. Anyone who has been in love knows how impossible it is to truly adequately write of the beloved, or anyone who has been beloved to someone else knows that it is utterly impossible for that person to truly, fully convey exactly how much they love you. And this is, of course, something that is part of our innate nature, because ultimately in Rūmī's theology and cosmology, his view of the whole spiritual universe, every single thing we love in this world is ultimately on one level a veil from God, but also a means to God. So anyone that we are loving, or anything, if we are so attached to a perishable thing, material possession or a status or something like that, ultimately we are mistaken there. But it is when we love another human being that we come closest to a foreshadowing of the love for God. Or rather, more correctly, what we love in that person is what we see of God in that person. So they are both a mirror and a veil. In one sense, if we love them apart from God, this is a veil. But if we love God through them, they are a means and a mirror by which we ultimately can attain greater and greater love of God through that particular form. But the ultimate goal, of course, in Rumi's entire spiritual teleology is to love the formless God. This is all the more so since the Sufi's beloved, capital B, so Habib, the beloved, transcends not only this world, but the next world as well, and everything we can possibly conceive or imagine. So this is the attributeless God, God without attributes. Rumi often remarks on the impossibility of explaining love, although in other verses he takes the complementary point of view. One can discuss it forever and never exhaust it. Of course, most love poetry, throughout every civilization, every culture, it is an inexhaustible ocean without end, an ocean without a shore. Love, ultimately for God, yes, but love, the love that one sees in the soul of the beloved, in my view, is, yes, that paradox of it is the veil, and yet it is the mirror. In any case, the result is the same. Love cannot be truly expressed in words. It is fundamentally an experience situated beyond the narrow confines of articulated thought, but an experience more real than the universe and all it contains. Quoting here at length on love from the Master, from Maulana Rumi, no matter what I say to explain and elucidate love, shame overcomes me when I come to love itself. Love cannot be contained within our speaking or listening. Love is an ocean whose depth cannot be plumbed. Would you try to count the drops of the sea? Before that ocean, the seven seas are nothing. Love cannot be found in erudition and science, books and pages, whatever is discussed by people. That is not the way of lovers. Whatever you have said or heard is the shell. The kernel of love is a mystery that cannot be divulged. Enough, Bala, enough. How long will you cling to these words of the tongue? Love has many expositions beyond speech. Silence, silence, for the illusions of love are reversed. The meanings become hidden from much speaking. Someone asked, "What is love?" I replied, "Ask not about those meanings. When you become like me, then you will know. When he calls you, you will recite its tale, the tale of love. O you who have listened to talk of love, behold love. What are words in the ears compared to vision in the eyes?" Love, then, has to be experienced to be understood, Chittick writes, but we can still glean a great deal about this ineffable reality from Rumi's words, so long as we remember that love exists to be realized, not discussed. If Rumi discusses it, he does so only to stir up the desire for love in the heart of the listener. Quoting here from Divan, verse 17361, "What is love? Perfect thirst. So let me explain the water of life." Chittick writes, God is love and beyond love. God is the source of all love, just as he is the source of all other things. But to what extent may it properly be said that God is love? Of course, this text here, the Arabic calligraphy, says Al-Wadud, which means the most loving or the loving one. It's one of the traditional 99 or 1001 names of God among the Asma al-Husna, the most beautiful names of the Islamic tradition, collected from the Quran chiefly. There are 99 in the Quran, and then the Hadith literature as well. So Al-Wadud, God as the most loving and the source of love itself. The fact that love is an attribute or sifat of God is confirmed implicitly by numerous Quranic verses in which God is said to love something. The Sufis usually quote the following verse, since it shows clearly the hierarchical relationship between God's love for man and man's love for God, the latter of which derives its existence from the former. So God loves men first, and then, aware of the divine love for them, man loves God, or man should love God. God will bring a people whom he loves, and who love him, humble toward the believers, disdainful toward the unbelievers, men who struggle in the path of God, not fearing the reproach of any reproacher. That's Quran, Surah 5, verse 54. As to whether or not we may say that God is love, the answer is the same as with any other divine attribute. Yes and no. God is certainly love, but this attribute does not exhaust his reality. In the same way he is mercy, knowledge, life, power, and will. He possesses all these qualities. His being is the same as their being, but we may not say that God is mercy and nothing else, or that he is knowledge and nothing else. As the coincidence of opposites, he possesses all his attributes absolutely, yet in his essence, al-that in Arabic, D-H-A-T, in approximate translation, in his essence, he is beyond them all. From one point of view, he is love, but from another point of view, he is beyond love. Both points of view are seen in Rūmī's verses in prose. Here he's quoting from Rūmī, "Love is affection beyond bounds. Hence, it is said that love is truly God's attribute, while it is the attribute of his servants only in a derivative sense. He loves them is everything. What then is they love him?" He's reflecting here on the Quran, that God loves us, that is the first cause. Our secondary derivative is to respond to that divine love for us with love for God. So God is the first actor here, and we are acting in response to that. Fear is not even a hair before love. In the religion of love, all things are sacrificed. Love is an attribute of God, but fear is an attribute of the servant afflicted by lust and gluttony. Since you have read in the Quran, they love him, placed in a single verse with he loves them, know that love and affection are attributes of God, but fear is not God's attribute, dear friend. We may experience fear. God experiences no fear. What relationship exists between God's attribute and that of a handful of dust, or between the attribute of a temporal being and that of the all-holy? If I should continue my explanation of love, 100 resurrections would pass before I could complete it. Since the date of the resurrection has a limit, but where are limits when it is a question of God's attributes? Know that love's branches are in eternity without beginning, its roots in eternity without end. This tree is not supported by God's throne, the earth, or a trunk. When I leave sleeping and eating behind, I will become like everlasting love, living, self-subsistent. So here he's equating God directly with love, since two of God's titles in the Quran are the living, al-Hayy, and the self-subsistent, the one who needs nothing. Others call thee love, but I call thee the Sultan of love, the ruler of love. O thou who art beyond the concept of this or that, do not go without me. No one has ever walked 2 or 3 paces toward the garden of love without 100 salams, greetings of peace and love, from the gardener. Beyond love are thousands upon thousands of courtyards, but their might and majesty prevent them from entering the mind. The caravan of the unseen enters the visible world, but it remains hidden from all these ugly people, people whose souls are ugly. How should lovely women come to ugly men? The nightingale always comes to the rose bush. In other words, the nightingale doesn't go and nest in a filthy, stinking mess of, branches and broken things. The nightingale loves to sing in the rose bush, amidst the fragrance, amidst the beauty of the roses. So, a lovely woman here is a divine blessing, or the spiritual faculties of a reified, beautiful soul, and an ugly man here is a symbol of the putrid soul, the soul weighed down by spiritual ugliness. The jasmine grows next to the narcissus. The rose comes to the sweet-mouthed bud. All of these are symbols. I mean that the other world keeps coming into this world. Like cream hidden in the soul of milk, no place keeps coming into place. Like intellect concealed in blood and skin, the traceless keeps entering into traces. And from beyond the intellect, beautiful love comes dragging its skirts, a cup of wine in its hand. And from beyond love, that indescribable one who can only be called that keeps coming. Chittick then writes in a subsection, the world is created by love. Love is desire and need. Although in his essence, God is beyond all need, yet at the level of his attributes, he said, I desire or loved to be known, so I created the world. This hadith Qudsi, or a saying of God, or a remark of a speech of God through the mouth of the Prophet, as opposed to just a remark of the Prophet. Hadith is one of the most famous in the Muslim spiritual tradition. So the reason for the creation of the cosmos, the emanation of everything that is other than God, from God, out of God, is God's desire to be known and to be loved. Likewise, it was his love for the Prophet which made him say, but for thee, I would not have created the celestial spheres. This is, of course, Mohammedan logos theology, that it is Muhammad himself, or the primordial Muhammad, the pre-eternal soul of Muhammad, which always existed in the mind of God, for which God created everything. This, of course, is very similar to certain mystical Christian traditions, which, of course, would locate this in the soul of Christ. Hence God's love for manifesting the hidden treasure through the prophets and saints was the motivating force in his creation of the universe. As a result, love courses throughout the world's arteries. All movement and activity result from that original love. The world's forms are but the reflections of its unique reality. And here Chittick begins quoting again from Rūmī at length. The creatures are set in motion by love. Love by eternity without beginning. The wind dances because of the spheres, the trees because of the wind. God said to love, if not for thy beauty, how should I pay attention to the mirror of existence? The world is like a mirror displaying love's perfection. O friends, who has ever seen a part greater than its whole? Love is the kernel, the world the shell. Love is the sweetmeat, or delicacy, the world the cauldron. Like Adam and Eve, love gives birth to 1,000 forms. The world is full of its paintings, but it has no form. O love, who hast 1,000 names and a cup of sweet wine, O thou who bestoweth 1,000 skills, O formless one with 1,000 forms, O form giver to the Turk, Greek, and Ethiopian. In other words, that in the divine dance, as it were, of love, all of the forms of the peoples of the earth are beautiful, unique, antipoid forms, manifestations of God. Love splits the spheres with 100 splittings. It shakes the earth mightily. Pure love was paired with Muhammad. For its sake, God said to him, but for thee, meaning but for thee I would have not created the creation or created the creatures. Since he was the unique goal of love, he meaning the prophet, God singled him out from the other prophets. But for pure love, how should I have given existence to the celestial spheres? I erected the heavenly wheel so that you might understand love's exaltation. The spheres turn for the sake of the lovers. The wheel revolves for the sake of love, not for the baker or ironsmith, not for the carpenter or druggist. The heavens turn round about love. Rise so that we may also turn. Behold, but for thee I would not have created. What did God say? Muhammad the chosen is love's mine, meaning the storehouse of all of love's treasures are deposited in the Prophet. For a time let us revolve around love. How long will we circle this carrion? The world as maintained by love. Chittick writes, all things participate in God's love, the motivating force of creation, so all things are lovers. In other words, each existent is infused with need and desire for other existence and is constantly striving to gain union with them. These individual loves are the immediate source of all movement and activity. Quoting here at length from the Divan, God's wisdom in his destiny and decree has made us lovers of one another. That foreordainment has paired all parts of the world and set them in love with their mates. Each part of the world desires its mate, just like amber and straw. Heaven says to the earth, hello, thou drawest me like iron to a magnet. The female desires the male, so that they may perfect each other's work. God placed desire within men and women, so that the world might find subsistence through their union. He places desire in each part for another part, and their union gives birth to offspring. 100,000 snakes and ants, 100,000 eaters of their daily bread, each seeks a share, each has its own lament. Oh, a different kind of fruit shakes every branch, a different cup of wine intoxicates each of us and makes us its fool. Behind the veil, 200 ladies have scratched their cheeks and beaten their heads, each widowed from a different mate. A fisherman's hook is stuck in every fish's mouth. The one shouts, "Oh dear," in agony. The other, "How lovely." Gabriel dances in love for God's beauty. The Afrit in love for a she-devil. Everyone was made for a particular task. Desire for it was placed in his heart. How should hand and feet move without desire? How should sticks and leaves move without water and wind? The king spoke hidden words into everyone's ear. To the spirit of each he gave a different message. War among the creatures, hatred among the living, he sets them there each instant. That is a fine friend. He spoke sweet and flowing words to the rose and made it laugh. He made a subtle point to the cloud and wet its eyes. He says to the rose, celebration is best. He says to the cloud, weeping is best. No one accepts the advice of another. He says to the branch, dance. To the leaves, clap. To the heavens, revolve about the earth's mansions. That world is like an ocean, and this world is foam. God the Almighty desired to keep the foam in good order, so he made certain people turn their backs to the ocean in order to maintain the foam. A tent has been pitched for the king, and certain people have been made busy keeping the tent in good order. One of them says, if I did not make the pegs, where could they tie the ropes? God gave each of them a satisfaction and happiness in his task, so much so that were he to live 100,000 years and do nothing else, every day his love for it would increase. The trees were saying, what a shame, under the earth we possess such skill and elegance and beauty. We have received such favors from God, and other roots have no knowledge of these things. Oh, would that there were a day of bazaar, a marketplace, so that we could display our beauty, so that our excellence and the ugliness of others could be brought to light. An answer came to them, to the trees, from the unseen world. O prisoners of water and clay, occupy yourselves with your tasks and acquire skills. Be not broken-hearted. Fear not that your skills will remain hidden, for we have placed these pearls and fruits in your treasuries, and you yourself had no knowledge of them. They were concealed in our unseen knowledge. Before entering into existence, the skills and beauties that you see today in yourselves were pearls in the unseen ocean, hurrying to enter the treasuries of the inhabitants of dry land. We have placed a special characteristic in every possessor of a skill, in every craftsman and master of a task, whether goldsmith, jeweler, magician, alchemist, and in every tradesman, lawyer, and scholar, so that he will always be bubbling over and displaying his own skill. We have placed this bubbling and this desire, and they have become unsettled, like girls who have just reached puberty. In their houses, the girls adorn their clothing and their beauty and gaze at mirrors. They want to tear aside the veil and show their loveliness to the elect and the vulgar. From the bottom of their souls they say, "Old women's words cannot hold us back. The heart-distressing world cannot detain us. She whose long tresses extend like a chain, not even a chain can keep her in the house." But what place is man's farm plot, within which the crop is flesh and skin and bones, for these aspirations and desires? These desires are my holy attributes. I was a hidden treasure, so I wanted to be known. In the next section, Love and Beauty, True and Derivative, Chittick writes as follows. Man's love can be divided into two kinds: true love, ishq-i-haqiqi, or love for God, and derivative love, ishq-i-majazi, or love for anything else. But on closer examination, one sees that all love is in fact love for God, since whatever exists is his reflection or shadow. The difference, then, between the two kinds of love is that some people know that only God truly exists and direct their love only toward him, while others believe in the independent existence of various objects of desire and so turn their love toward them. But since love for other than God derives from love for him, it ultimately leads to him. One by one, man's objects of desire will show their unfaithfulness, and man will turn his love elsewhere. However, many will not find the true beloved until after death, when it will be too late to try to close the gap of separation. This is the root of the prophetic hadith, sometimes attributed to the Prophet, other times to Imam Ali, that the true seeker after God must die before you die. Die in the soul before you die in the body, so that then, when you die in the body, you do not die in the soul. In other words, your soul, your spirit, lives on, having recognized God as the ultimate beloved. But since love for other than God derives from love for him, it ultimately leads to him. One by one, however, many will not find the true beloved until after death, when it will already be too late to try to close the gap of separation. The Sufi has already discovered that there is only one beloved. He sees all derivative love, by comparison, as cold and unreal and temporary. In the present context, Rūmī explains the nature of beauty clearly and succinctly. It is a drop of spray from the infinite ocean, or a ray of light shining upon a wall. All beauty derives from the other world, so here it is borrowed and ephemeral. True beauty pertains ultimately only to God. Quoting at length from the Divan, "In the eyes of the elect, love is a tremendous eternal light, even though the vulgar see it as but form and sensuality. All the hopes, desires, loves, and affections that people have for different things, fathers, mothers, friends, heavens, the earth, gardens, palaces, sciences, works, food, drink, the saint knows that these are desires for God, and all these things are veils. When men leave this world and see the King without these veils, then they will know that all were veils and coverings, that the object of their desire was in reality that one thing, God. All their difficulties will be solved, all the questions and perplexities they had in their breasts will be answered. They will see all things face to face. All things in this world, wealth, women, clothing, are desired for the sake of other things, not for their own sake. Do you not see that if you had 100,000 dirhams and were hungry, but you could not find food, you would not be able to eat these dirhams? Women are for So it is with all things which are linked together, one after the other, all the way to God. It is He who is desired for His own sake, not for something else. He is better than all things, nobler than all, pleasanter than all. So how should He be desired for the sake of what is less than He? So He is the goal. He's quoting here from the Quran, Surah 53, verse 42. When He is attained, the universal object of desire has been attained. There is no passing on. Anyone madly in love with a dead thing has hope for something that lives. The carpenter has turned toward wood in hope of serving a moon-faced beloved. Strive in the hope of a living one who does not become inanimate after a day or two. Choose not a mean companion out of meanness, for intimacy with him is but a borrowed thing. If your intimates other than God possess faithfulness, what happened to your father and mother? If you can depend on someone other than God, where are your nursemaid and tutor? Your intimacy with milk and breasts has gone. Your dread of grammar school has gone. That was a ray upon the wall of their existence. The radiance has returned to the sun. When that ray falls upon something, you become its lover, O courageous man. Whatever you love in existence has received a gold plating from God's attributes. When the gold returns to its origin and the copper remains, your nature becomes disgusted and divorces it. Pull yourself back from those things gold-plated with His attributes. Continue not in your ignorance to call the counterfeit coin beautiful. That beauty of the counterfeit coin is a borrowed thing. Beneath its comeliness, its beauty, lies the substance of uncomeliness, ugliness. Gold leaves the surface of the counterfeit coin for the mine. You also go to that mine where it is going. Go to God. Light goes from the wall to the sun. Go to the sun that always moves in proportion. From now on, take water from heaven, for you have seen no faithfulness from the drain pipe. So don't get water from the bottom of the drain pipe. Go to the source, go to the heavens, from which rain comes. Go to God. Love is an attribute of God, who has no needs. To be in love with other than Him is derivative, for its beauty is gold-plated. Outwardly it is light, inwardly smoke. When the light goes and the smoke appears, then derivative love turns cold. That beauty returns to its source. A body remains, putrid, disgraced, and ugly. The moonlight returns to the moon. Its reflection leaves the black wall. Then water and clay remain without that ornament. Without the moon, the wall becomes like a devil. When gold leaves the face of a counterfeit coin and returns to dwell in its own mine, the disgraced copper remains like smoke, but its lover is even more black-faced, even more angry. All this beauty and attractiveness in the face of the black earth has shone forth from the moon of the unseen. It is a ray of perfection's light. Beauty in man is like gilding. Otherwise, why did your lovely mistress become an old ass? She was like an angel, but became a devil, for her comeliness was a borrowed thing. In other words, all physical beauty passes away for men and women. The moon-faced beauties of the world have stolen beauty from our beauty, God says. They have stolen a mote of my beauty and goodness. In the end, these moon-faced darlings will be straw-faced. Such is the state of thieves in my authority's presence. Day has come, O dust creature. return what you have stolen. O sweet beloved, how should dust possess wealth or beauty? In other words, day here is bodily death. When night veils the sun, the planets begin to boast. Venus says, "Know that all belongs to me." The moon retorts, "It is mine." Jupiter brings pure gold out of his sack. Mars threatens Saturn, "Watch out for my sharp dagger." Mercury sits at the front. "I am the chief of chiefs. The heavens are my property, and the constellations my pillars." At daybreak, the sun brings its regiments from the east. It says to the planets, "O thieves, where have you gone? Now all belongs to me." Venus's liver has been torn, and the moon's neck broken. My shining face has turned Mercury dry and cold. Our light has destroyed the work of Mars and Saturn. Destitute, Jupiter cries out, "Gone, my sack of gold." The universe displays the beauty of thy comeliness, thy beauty, God's beauty. The goal is thy beauty. All else is pretext. Through the cup of the noble thou hast poured a drop from that hidden goblet upon this earth of dust. Since tresses and cheeks show a sign of that drop, kings keep licking the ground. Delicate earth has received a drop of beauty, so you kiss it night and day with 100 hearts. Though mixed with earth, a single drop can drive you mad. What then will that wine do to you when pure? In reality, that which attracts is a single thing, but it appears multiple. Do you not see how a man desires 100 different things? He says, "I want tutmaj stew, I want burak, I want halva, I want fried meat, I want fruit, I want dates." He enumerates and names all these things, but the root is one thing. Hunger. Do you not see that after he is surfeited with a single thing, he says, "None of these is necessary"? Hence it is clear that there were not 10 or 100 things. There was only one, man's longing for his Lord, for God, the beloved. Your beloved is not form, whether your love is from this world or that. Why do you leave the form that you love when its spirit goes? Its form is still there. Why have you had your fill? O lover, look carefully. Who is your beloved? When you go to a friend's form, you go for the sake of your companionship with him. Hence, in meaning, you have gone to the formless, even if you are unaware of your goal. So in reality, God is worshipped by all things, for they all travel their paths in search of joy. But some have turned their faces toward the tail. The head is the root, but they have lost it. On page 212, Chittick writes, in a subsection titled "The Religion of Love," love for God implies theory, practice, and realization. The lover discerns the true beloved from derivative beloveds, augments his seeking and need through spiritual discipline under the guidance of a sheikh, and negates all things other than the beloved, including himself, so that only he, capital H, God, remains. Love's creed is separate from all religions. The creed and denomination of lovers is God. What is the mirage of the heavens? Non-existence. The religion and creed of the lovers is non-existence. My religion is to live through love. Life through this spirit and body is my shame. The intellect does not know and is bewildered by the religion of love, even if it should be aware of all religions. In the religion of the lovers, that spirit is mortally ill, whose illness does not make him worse every day. Everything other than love for the most beautiful God is agony of the spirit, though it be sugar-eating. What is agony of the spirit? To advance toward death without seizing hold of the water of life. The worst of all deaths is to be without love. Why does the oyster tremble? For the pearl. Every breast without the beloved is a body without head. The man far from love's snare is a bird without wings. What does he know of the universe? For he knows nothing of those who know. If love's pulse does not beat within a man, let him be Plato. He is but an axe. If a head is not full of love, that head is behind the tail. If you have not been a lover, count not your life as lived, for on the day of reckoning it will not be counted. Any time that passes without love will be shamefaced before God. A lifetime without love is of no account. Love is the water of life. Drink it down with heart and soul. Know that all but the lovers are fish without water, dead and desiccated, though they be viziers, prime ministers. The school is love, the teacher the Almighty, and we are like students, these words our recitation. The lover's teacher is the beloved's beauty. Their book and lesson are his face. Choose love, love. Without the sweet life of love, living is a burden, as you have seen. Is the 2 or 3 days you live in this world, in the 2 or 3 days you live in this world, what a shame to live only by spirit. Never be without love, lest you be dead. Die in love, and remain alive. The subsistent things, the deeds of righteousness, are love. This world is chaff, and love is wheat. The wind of death's fixed term will take away the chaff. A single fleck will not remain. May their light running before them, he's quoting here from the Quran, always be the outcome. Persevere in your intention and encourage, advise, and aid your friends to do the same, for this is the work. The rest is all regret. The dominion of this world is like a drum whose beating bewilders people and attracts them to it. Yet it is empty within. It is no excellence or profit. Happy is he who finds the druggist's tray, the tabla of love, and whose heart turns cold toward the sound of the drum, tabl, of this world's dominion. It's a pun here. From end to end, the world's dominion brings naught to your head but headache. Empty head, why lay so much headache on your head? Though you make the sun and moon your head's crown, you will be placing your head on cold brick once your life comes to a head. Love is the water of life, and will deliver you from death. O he who throws himself into love is a king. Love is the bottomless ocean of life. Everlasting life is the least of its gifts. A call reached the lover from the world of his inmost mystery. Love is God's burak. Put it to the gallop. Mount upon love, and think not about the way, for the horse of love is very sure-footed. Though the path be uneven, in a single bound it will take you to the way station. Love is a mother who will take her child, the lover, before the Sultan, only in safety. Until he has matured and become free from his spirit, she will not take him before that spirit of the spirit of the spirit. May my spirit be sacrificed to love, for the only place it takes the heart is on a mirage to the heavens. I hope you've enjoyed these excerpts from The Sufi Path of Love by Dr. Chittick. It's a book that I would heartily recommend to any of you interested in a fundamental understanding of the great breadth and depth of Maulana Rumi's work, which is of an enduring popularity all these past 800 years up to now. Thank you so much. As always, please subscribe to receive notifications about our latest videos, and be well.